We're about to dive into one of the oldest, most foundational stories in the world, the opening chapters of Genesis. But we're not just going to retell it. We're going to unpack the incredible human drama tucked inside these pages to see how this ancient story frames the fundamental choices that really have defined humanity ever since.
So to really get why the Genesis narrative hits so hard, it helps to start with a more modern point of view. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre had this hugely influential idea that if there's no God, we're basically just thrown into a meaningless universe. Our lives are just pointless, a losing battle against the absurdity of it all.
But Genesis comes along and just flips that whole idea on its head. It asks a massive question. What if that pessimism isn't the starting point? What if the universe was actually designed to be a friendly place with a real purpose, and our sense of meaninglessness isn't the default, but the result of something going terribly wrong?
And these first few chapters of Genesis, you can really read them as this deep dive into that exact riddle. They're making the case that our search for meaning isn't just random. It has a source, and it all kicked off with one single pivotal choice.
And that brings us right to Eve. Her run-in with the serpent isn't just some fairy tale about temptation. No, it's presented as the ultimate example, a kind of blueprint for how we as human beings figure out what's real and what's not. It's a story about knowledge itself.
There's actually a fancy word for this, right? It's called epistemology. It's the part of philosophy that wrestles with the huge question, how do we know what we know? And Eve's problem at its very core is an epistemological one. She's stuck between two totally different ways of knowing what's true.
And her options are laid out right here. On one side, you've got God's command, this word from outside of her that she's asked to simply trust. On the other side, you have the serpent's logic, which encourages her to be suspicious, to rely on her own eyes, her own observations, her own gut feeling.
So what does she do? Well, the text tells us she does her own investigation. She uses her own senses. She sees that the fruit is good for food. She sees it's a delight to the eyes, and she decides it's exactly what she needs to get wisdom. She puts aside the word she was given and trusts her own experience instead. And wow, that one choice, it changes everything.
And you see the fallout from that choice almost immediately in the very next generation. Humanity just splinters. The story of Cain and Abel isn't just about two brothers who don't get along. It represents two fundamentally different ways to live in this new post-choice world. You can see the difference in their very names. Cain, his name comes from a word that means to get, to acquire, to possess. He's all about building, achieving, and relying on himself. But Abel, his name, Hebel, literally means breath or vapor. It suggests something fleeting, temporary, almost insignificant if you're only looking at it from a worldly point of view.
So if you're just keeping score based on worldly success, Cain is the clear winner, right? He gets it all. He's got his own ideas about God, he gets his own land, he builds the very first city to create his own security, and he even has a son to carry on his name. He is building his own world, completely on his own terms.
And Abel, he had nothing. He basically just shows up, makes his offering, which God favors, by the way, and then he's gone. Poof, like a puff of smoke. I mean, from that purely worldly, Sartrean viewpoint, his life is the poster child for meaninglessness. And yet in the story, his was the way that God accepted.
But the story doesn't just leave us there, in that dark place of violence and despair. No, there's this massive turning point, the birth of a third son, Seth, and he represents God's answer to all that tragedy.
Eve herself tells us just how important his birth is. Seth isn't just another baby. He's appointed, a substitute. His name comes from a word that suggests he is a gracious gift put in place of the one who was tragically lost.
So this is a total reset. You've got Cain's family line over here, building a civilization based on their own strength. But Seth's lineage, they're defined by a completely different posture. It says they began to call upon the name of the Lord. It's about dependence, not independence. A whole new path is being forged.
Okay, now we get to a part that, let's be honest, a lot of us just skim through. The genealogy in chapter 5. It looks like this long, dry list of names and ages, but trust me, if you read it as a story, it is unbelievably powerful. It's a chronicle of death, but with this tiny spark of hope buried deep inside. It kicks off, and you immediately start to hear this rhythm, this drumbeat, reminding us of the consequence of that first choice. Adam lived 930 years, and he died.
the pattern just keeps going. This relentless reminder of mortality. Seth, the son of promise, lived 912 years, and he died.
It builds to its absolute peak with Methuselah. I mean, this guy lives longer than anyone else in the Bible, a staggering 969 years. And still, he died. The point couldn't be clearer. Death gets everyone. Or does it?
And then, out of nowhere, the pattern shatters. With Enoch, the story doesn't say, and he died, it says he walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Wait, what? It's this complete mind-blowing break in the chain of death.
This opens up this incredible new idea. That phrase, walked with God, it's not just about going for a stroll. It implies this deep friendship, this intimacy, two people heading in the same direction, in lockstep. And Enoch's story hints that that kind of connection with the Creator offers a destiny that goes beyond the grave. And the whole list wraps up with Noah. His name literally means rest or relief. It was given with the hope that he would finally bring some comfort from all the toil and pain. So the list doesn't end on a note of death, but on a promise of rest. So, let's pull all this together. What we have here is this incredible framework for making sense of things. It all starts with the choice. Are we going to trust the word from God or our own judgment? That choice leads down two very different paths, the way of Cain, building our own world, or the way of Abel, living by faith. But even in the darkness, there's a promise of a new beginning through grace, like with Seth. And finally, there's this amazing hope, planted by Enoch's story, that a life of intimacy with God can actually lead to a destiny beyond death. And that brings it all right back to us, doesn't it? We are swimming in a sea of competing truths, with everyone telling us what's real, who to be, and how to live. So this ancient story forces us to ask ourselves a very modern question. What am I really building my life on? When it all comes down to it, what is the ultimate basis for my most fundamental choices?